Welcome to Mile High Reefers. I'm Scott Anderson, and today's a special day. I'm headed over to Jake Adams of Reef Builders' house to check out his personal tank. So for the first episode, we're going to do equipment, and then next week, we're going to go over the livestock in his tank. It's so great to be here in your home today with you, Jake. Now, for those of you who don't know, this is Jake Adams of Reef Builders and the Reef Builders YouTube channel.
What's going on, guys?
Jake, why don't you briefly tell us about Reef Builders and the YouTube channel you do?
So, you know, when I was younger, I had reef tanks in mid-90s. My dream was, to work with aquariums in some way or another. And about 10 years ago, I fell into Reef Builders, which was started by my partner Ryan Grip. And for the last 10 years, we've just been telling stories, trying to stay on top of the news, travel all around the world to factories, to coral reefs, to shops, to see the tanks. And just in the last year, really been taking the YouTube thing a little bit more seriously, a little bit more deliberately, finding a new medium to tell the stories, and it's really been a lot of fun.
So we're looking at a really lovely tank. Tell us about the tank itself. What is it?
So this is a 60-gallon cube, so it's 2 feet on each edge, 60 centimeters for everyone else in the world. I actually inherited this tank from a local reefer when she moved away to Hawaii. This was actually a non-photosynthetic tank. So I've had the tank for 2 years, but it was only about a year ago that I decided to not do photosynthetic corals because it was just so hard to find enough corals and to keep the tank happy. And I decided that was a completely different hobby and I want to do what I'm familiar with. So this tank, as you see it, is really just about 1 year old. It really has showcased a lot of the different ideas and philosophies that I like about reefing into one whole reef tank. So yeah, this tank I enjoy very much, and I'm very proud of the equipment that I'm using on it.
And do you have any of the original inhabitants still in this tank from that NPS?
What's interesting is the tank came with 4 fish. So there was a sunburst anthias, Banggai cardinalfish, yellow assessor, and a small plectrantheus. And I've added other fish through time, and not all of them have survived, but the original 4 fish, man, they are not going anywhere. Those guys are tough as nails.
It just goes to show how well these guys can do once they acclimate to their environment.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, because of your job, Reef Builders, you have access to some of the best gear in the world. Tell us about some of the gear you're using and your philosophy behind it.
Well, for a long time, there was definitely a movement to control all the things and to make everything under one umbrella, under one kind of like controller umbrella. And that didn't really work for me, so I've migrated towards using devices that each have their own smarts. So I can make everything dance, from the pumps to the lights, the power heads, protein skimmer. Everything is controllable, but controllable on its own. I don't have to pull out my phone. A lot of the controllers are accessible right here just with a simple touch. And for something that's a little bit more sophisticated, I only rely on products that have really well polished apps to get into.
So speaking of well polished apps, I'm noticing you have some Radions hanging above your tank.
Yep.
Tell us about those Radion lights.
So like I mentioned, this tank started out as an NPS tank, right? So it didn't need any light, so I only had an AI prime on it. Just enough light to kind of illuminate and show me what was inside. And when I decided to make this an SP, or just a broad spectrum tank, a community tank, first thing I added was the Radion Gen 4 Pro, because the Gen 4 has those hemispherical lenses that really have a better light distribution. But since I had the Gen 3 from when I took down my brother's tank, I decided to add them both to the tank, and then I turned them down, because my whole desire right now with reef aquarium lighting is not to get brighter light, but it's just to get really even light field. So I was really fortunate enough, either of these Radion Pros would be enough for this tank. You could probably do an amazing reef tank in here with just an XR15 Pro, but since I had them, I put them both, and but I'm using the strengths of each light separately. So on the back, I've got the Gen 4 Pro with the really wide angle lenses, and it really helps to cover fill in the whole tank. And you'll see I've got it angled forward just a little bit. And on the front, I've got the Gen 3 Pro, which has the older TIR lenses, and those have a little bit more punch And since I have it at the front, I have it lighting up the front of the tank and angled backwards, so I can really film the light on these corals. And in the early days of EcoSmart Live, it might have been a kind of touch and go to really get that working. But with Radion's EcoSmart Live now, I can dial these in like all the time. Any time of the day, if I want it whiter or bluer, it takes me moments to access that. So I've been really thrilled with these lights.
I think you're absolutely right. The big trend right now is towards coverage, and I love the way you've set that up. There's just very little in the way of shadowing.
Except where I want it, right? There's a couple caves which are deliberately shadowed, and I put some low light stuff in there, deliberately.
So you don't have a controller. How are you monitoring things like temperature, pH, all the fun stuff?
So temperature and pH are so critical to a reef aquarium. And some of the aquarium controller companies, they're really good at pulling components, from an open market and putting them together in a package that does it all. But you've heard the old adage, jack of all trades, master of none. And I really feel that the opposite is true with the DL125 from Milwaukee Instruments. Milwaukee Instruments makes near lab grade stuff for horticulture, for aquaculture, and this is what they do, right? This company, they make monitors, they make controller. This actually has some controlling features, but I don't rely on them. So this particular device measures pH, ORP, and temperature. And I don't monitor salinity because that's something that I check manually like all the time. I'm super paranoid. I mix up my water, I check the salinity, and then I double check the salinity every time right before I use it. But one of the reasons I really love this particular unit, for one, I have it mounted right next to my door. So right when I walk in or when I walk out, it's in my face. That's one thing that you'll see about several of the different devices I use in my aquarium. Things are in my face, they're at eye level, so I don't have to remember to look at them, right? It's in my face, and you have these color indicators that can kind of grab my attention if something's off. But for me, like the biggest selling point of this particular device is I set it up in February and calibrated the pH, right? And if you've used some of the more widely available aquarium controllers, the combination of poor implementation or mid-grade probes, they start to drift within a few weeks, and a few months later you have to recalibrate it. This was calibrated in February. I have a separate pH pen that can double check the readings from this, and it's still spot on. So the pH reading here 10 months later is almost nearly exactly what it should be. So that's what I like about using a dedicated monitor for the parameters from a company that specializes in it, because the implementation is just so much better. So I really trust these values, and so I love having it in my face. I trust these values, and that's what I do for the monitoring.
You have a very unique setup for mounting your controllers and dosing pump. Tell us about that system you have right there.
So I think in reef tanks, there's a natural inclination to try to hide everything, right? Everybody's trying to stuff everything under the aquarium cabinet where it's exposed to salt creep, where it's really hard to access, where you don't know which plug goes to which device, right? So for this setup, I wanted something that was going to be highly visible, but also somewhat attractive, right? So I have all the cords tied together in a nice, neat arrangement. I have all the tubing here, nice and neat, but I'm just going to take it from the top. So this is the Arca-Vida Doser, and I really enjoyed this thing, but it's also the last non-smart device I'm ever going to use for this, because programming it through this touchpad, I have a lot of experience with nesting menus, so I can go through it fast, but I've actually had to help a lot of other people figure out, because you have to calibrate the dosing, you have to calibrate the back flushing. But the reason I love this the most is it has a mixing feature, and so it mixes all the elements for a couple minutes before dosing, and I really feel like that helps to homogenize the mixtures, right? A lot of the additives today are getting really, really concentrated, and I think some of them might actually be more concentrated towards the bottom than at the top. So having this feature really, really helps to make sure that every time I'm dosing 5 mLs of calcium or buffer, it's the same from the beginning to the end. So that's the Arca-Vida Doser. It's good, but the next generation of wirelessly controllable touchscreen through an app is definitely the future. So I love this, but this is the last one of its kind I'm going to use. And then you'll see some more familiar things. This is the controller for the Vectra, controller for the 2 pumps. And I can make these dance from the app, but it's just so much faster to just push the button. Push the button. And turn things off just on a dime when I'm working, when the skimmer is overflowing for some reason, you know, just turn things on and off right away. And this is an interesting little accessory. This is called the Corrente. This is actually a flow meter that also measures temperature in Celsius. Because like I said, I assume everything's broken, I assume everything's wrong. So on the Milwaukee you saw Fahrenheit, on here you have Celsius, and that's just a small little device that you can see that's in line with the Vectra pump. But here you can kind of see the power strip, and all my power supplies are actually in here, and I can actually open this up. Let's see, I haven't done this in a while. I can open this up.
Oh, that's nice.
And hang it. And I can hang it so you can see like all the power supplies right here at a glance.
Oh, that's such a nice, tidy way to get to everything.
So it lets the electronics breathe, but also protects them from any kind of salt creep.
Very nice. So you'd showed me pictures of your tank before I got over, and I was kind of expecting a really crazy sump setup. But this one's pretty simplistic. Tell me about it.
You know, it's anticlimactic. For me, like, the biggest feature of the sump is actually taking the door off. I had thought about it for a long time. I had a door on here, and then one day I was just like, you know what? I just don't want that door anymore. I just want to see what's going on. But otherwise, it's just a cube, kind of like the tank. This was made by Fluid Designs here in Denver several years ago. And it's got kind of like a primary chamber to reduce the noise from the drain. And then a secondary chamber here for mechanical filtration. That's where I actually put a bag of GFO. But one thing that you really tripped out on, which I kind of take for normal now, is this front chamber here. Normally this tank is pretty dark. This sump is pretty dark, so this is where I keep some of my dedicated NPS corals. So there's a couple of Melanophilias in there, a couple of branching Dendrophilias, and this is really cool. It's actually not open right now, but I'll send you a clip of it to use in the video.
Fantastic.
This is my ball tentacle anemone, and it's related to Recordias, but it looks like an anemone, but it's actually a coralomorph with these big, big white ball tentacles. And if I put it in here, it would straight up eat fish.
And is it non-photosynthetic?
Yeah, no, everything in here is non-photosynthetic.
Fantastic.
I just feed that sometimes. Any leftover food from the tank has to go through here. And here you can see the Tunze adjustable. This is a controllable protein skimmer, but what's cool about the Tunze, it's also self-leveling. So I actually have it in a little bit too much water right now. I know that. So I'm going to look for something that's, you know, some kind of device or some kind of riser that's maybe about 2 inches thicker, just to elevate it out of the water, because I can't adjust the height. And then got a Vectra M1 calibrated for a little bit less flow rate. What's cool about having a bigger pump than you need is when you run it at about 10%, it's so quiet, right? It doesn't have to have the crazy RPMs to get the flow up. So yeah, this Vectra M1 pushes about 2,000 gallons per hour at full intensity. Right now it's at 865 liters, so it's pushing 250 gallons per hour, so 10% of its max output.
I love that. So you have the controller for the pump, plus you have the flow meter on it, so you can dial it exactly how you want it.
In increments, right? I can't do 1 liter at a time.
Right, but still, I mean, compared to me where I'm just putting my hand in front of it and feeling it.
Yeah, I know what it's doing.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, very cool. And since it's a big, visible display, that's readily apparent on the webcam that I use when I'm out of town.
So one thing that strikes me is I don't see any reactors on your tank. How are you managing your water quality?
You know, I have had some reactors in here, but for larger tanks, reactors make a lot of sense. The total tank volume on this system is about 80 gallons, and it's just a lot of work to just get in there and replace the media on a carbon or GFO reactor, and I've never been a big fan of biopellets. I just haven't had the luck with it. I know it works for other people. So NoPox is my dosage. I like to do it manually. I look at the tank, it's a little scuzzy, I add a little bit more NoPox when I feel like it. Prodibio, I really believe in Prodibio as far as like dosing a bacterial population. I think that really helps to keep the tank clean. and it mitigates and minimizes how much GFO I have to use, how much carbon I have to use. But you know, when it's been a while since you've done a water change, you know to use a little activated carbon. That really helps. But for the most part, I just have this secondary chamber here for the incoming water. This is what we did for eons and eons before reactors came along. And you know, even if I had a reactor, I'm only using like half a cup or less than a cup of each one, maybe once a month, you know, unless you have a big tank and you need to use half a liter or you know, like a significant amount. It just doesn't make sense to use something else. So I use just a small filter bag in the way of the water flow.
Yeah, I really like just the simplicity of it all. It just looks so easy.
Yeah, no, I like to be in tune with my tank. You know, I don't want everything automated. I want to know what's going on and not have to refer to some computer brain to tell me what's happening. I pay really close attention to this tank, and this is how I approach the dosing and using reactors for medias like GFO and activated carbon.
Now, in my video, you gave me a lot of crap about dosing. So what are you dosing your tank?
So we already talked about what I'm using to dose here, but this is a 4-part solution, and I'm using Triton. This is the calcium, this is the buffer, this is the magnesium, and in part 4, I kind of alternate between using a trace element additive. Even though this has trace elements in it in the Triton method, I like dosing just periodically, dosing a little bit of trace. But this 4th chamber is really for when I go out of town, because this is what I'll put the AcraPower in when I leave the home. So yeah, AcraPower, everybody who knows me as a reefer knows I'm personally addicted to it. So for those things, I actually have 2 pump bottles. This is for my NoPox. I don't want it dosed regularly. I want to dose it when I know it needs it. And then for the AcraPower, I just, this is about 1 ml per pump. So just 5-6 mLs per day is all it takes.
I love the pump bottle idea. That's so much easier than like dumping it out of the bottle and trying to measure it out.
I've actually ordered some nicer, fancier pump bottles on Amazon. I should be here this week, so I can upgrade my pump bottles from reused ones with a nice stainless steel pump.
Oh, heck yeah.
I use that for my freshwater tank, for my trace elements, because it takes a certain amount of time to take the top off, pour out 5 mLs just right, but when you know one pump is approximately 1 mL, just pop, 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 I can barely be awake in the morning and do it.
So I'm noticing we're missing one bit of dosing that I know you're doing.
So when it comes to reef tanks, you know, people are attracted by the pretty lights. They want to know how much flow you have in your tank. But if you're taking away one thing from my aquarium, is I really focus on the fundamentals. So the only one thing that I do very manually is the salinity, but I watch temperature 2 different ways, in Celsius and in Fahrenheit. I've got all my dosage here, but after salinity, after temperature, pH is so important, and I've had incredible results and response from my corals beginning about 2 months ago when I started dosing Kalkwasser with a calc reactor that keeps my pH about 0.2 higher than it was before, and I've got that all the way over here. Not everything needs to be right under the tank, right? We have this idea that everything needs to be compact. So this is actually my Kalkwasser stirrer. This was actually a pretty fun project. It was a U-built kit from Avast Marine. It was like 120 bucks, 130 bucks for this, and I had to glue a few parts. This is a John Land dosing pump, and I've actually got it magnetically connected to the bottom of this bracket here. And it's dosing about 100 mLs of Kalkwasser every hour, all the time. So one thing people always ask also is about the top-off. This is the 50-gallon barrel that I use for a mechanical float valve, not a float switch. So, this tank has enough for a reservoir for 6 weeks uncovered. If I cover the tank, this will top it off for like 2 to 3 months. But what's cool is that most of the top off is actually coming from the Kalkwasser stirrer, and it's pulling from the same vat. And if there's any difference between how much this is dosing and how much the tank is evaporating, the mechanical float valve will take care of it.
Now tell us about that mechanical float valve, because I think that's really important.
On my nano tank upstairs, which I haven't shown you yet, I have an Auto Aqua ATO Micro, because you can't put a float valve on a 5-gallon tank, you know. That's got a float switch. But the float valve is just, it closes automatically when it reaches the right level. As the water level falls, it allows some water to trickle through, and then that float valve will just kind of stop the water from coming in. And there's virtually no way for that to fail unless gravity somehow stops working or you get something clogged in it. But as you see, I have kind of a medium biology reef tank, so I don't have incrustations all over the place. I'm not dosing like crazy amounts that's going to precipitate on the float valve. So everything on my reef tank is really for redundancy, reliability, and yeah, I can really count on this gear to perform how I want it to. So yeah, thanks for having us over. You know, me and Scott are trying to do more collabs this year and throughout the year. We got a lot of cool stuff to look forward to. Definitely, if you enjoy this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to Scott's channel. Mile High Reefers is one of my favorite channels.
And of course, subscribe to Reef Builders.
Very cool.
Check out the Reef Builders website, and I know we're seeing each other again in February. We've got a big event coming.
Me and Scott are, you know, both in Colorado, and the big ReefStock event is happening. Last year we had a big bash for the 10th ReefStock in a row. Here we're going into number 11, and we're going to have a great time. We got Sanjay Yoshi coming. Vincent Chalias is flying all the way from Bali.
Sweet.
He's godfather of coral farming, and you know, we're going to have a great time.
Hell yeah.
And since I'm running the show, Scott's going to be covering it, so you definitely want to subscribe so you don't miss that. So thanks for coming over, Scott.
All right, man. Thank you. I appreciate it.
We'll catch you guys next time.
It's been a great time. See you later.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.